Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Jeff Mendelson, and this is the One Big Tip podcast. Wow, messed that one up. Imagine that. My guest today is Eric Holtzclaw. Eric is a serial entrepreneur who truly understands that marketing requires discipline, consistency, and strategy. As a chief strategist and dojo master at Liger, he is the resident expert in guiding businesses to find their identities and core values, craft their visions, and establish their brands. Eric also hosts the Claw podcast, where he interviews business owners and entrepreneurs to discuss their goals. He has contributed to magazines and online publications and wrote the book Laddering, Unlocking the Potential of Consumer Behavior. This is going to be a great conversation today. Eric, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I want to learn a little bit more about your background, what you guys do, and what makes you so awesome.
So I'm a recovering technologist. So I spent my early part of my career running development shops. And then for a period of time, I owned a research company. So I understood customers and what customers care about. Marketing, which is a combination of understanding your customer and technology. So just kind of a long career, mostly in the services side of the business. We do a lot of B2B work and M&A and things like that. So yeah.
All right, so really cool. So one of the cool things that that you've been working on, right, is that I see that you're working with a lot of video, right? And some of and what's interesting about video is that first of all of our kids are born with these nifty little devices in their hands, so they're all recording stuff in 4K. And I think it's about time to get us adults to do the same thing. How did all that come about, right? And what are your thoughts on helping brands and companies getting involved with that as well?
B2B. So they're not as open to putting someone out front. And you really have to do that in today's world in order for you to get attention, because no one wants to buy from a company. They want to buy from individuals. So it is one of the struggles that we have when we're talking with a client around, hey, so we need to take some of your leaders and understand what their opinions are. And they've got to be willing to, whip out that cell phone and take some impromptu video, because that's really what plays better at the end of the day. So it is an interesting hurdle, specifically on the B2B side, because I see it for business to consumer brands, but B2B brands are a little bit late to the party. They're still doing some things that are some old school tactics.
Why do you think that B2B companies are late to this? Is it just that they were traditionally used to hiding behind their corporate veil and didn't really have to get out there? Or do you think that there's something a little bit deeper going on?
Well, I mean, there's that, right? Like they were used to it being about the brand and not coming up with your age, but knowing mine. So I know when I started with my business, about the business brand, and then there were people behind it. Now you want to know who runs the company and understand there's a brand behind them. And so that's just a change that happened. Kind of 2008 was kind of a watershed year for that. And it's really not about B2B or B2C. It's human to human. Right. So we're a human selling something to another human. And in the B2B space, I think it's more important because it's based on relationship. So if I make a B2B decision, I could lose my job. I could look stupid in front of my boss. So the decision is way more risky than it is on the B2C side. So I honestly want to know more who I'm buying from on the B2B side than I do on the B2C, because if I don't like that car, I just never will buy from that auto dealer again. No big deal. But if I purchase a piece of software that my company's going to use, I could be stuck with that for a long time, and that relationship has to be strong. So who is it that's going to support me in that B2B space to make sure I'm successful?
That's really interesting that you bring that up, is, because knowing who your partner is on the other side is really important, right? And we're not just talking about some spokesmodel or someone who's been classically trained in order to go out there and be picture perfect. I mean, geez, just look at me. I'm the one that started in high school, right? Like, what kind of business do I have being in front of a microphone, right? And also moving over to video has been one of the scariest things, at least for me, that in my business, because I was also hiding behind the brand. Like I remember a time when I was all excited that I had an 800 number, right? So that people thought that I had a bigger company than I really was. And it was just like, well, no, that doesn't work anymore. Like, who cares? Right. Yeah. And what happens is, I think now we also have this plethora of channels that we can go to on our own. No longer do we are the channels just the big 3 TV networks here in the United States. Now you have all these different cable stations and you have all these different video platforms that you can go to as well. Each one of those is a different neighborhood unto themselves.
Yeah,
So let me ask you this
absolutely.
then. How do you help companies then figure out, like, should I be on Facebook? Should I be on LinkedIn? Should I be on YouTube? Should I be pointing at invisible things on TikTok? Like where does that come in?
Well, so our advice is that you do pick a platform where your customers are, and those customers could be in Facebook or LinkedIn or TikTok or any of those other places. But what's almost more important than the platform you pick is that you pick multiple platforms, because you don't own the platform. And so once you put content out on that platform and something, let's say, happens to it, I mean, there used to be a thing called MySpace. Who knows what's going on with Twitter right now? If all of your credibility, all of your time has been spent just on that one platform and something happens to it, you lose all of that. So you need to hedge your bets and make sure that you're thinking of at least 2, maybe 3, and that you're getting your content out across of those so that you're not investing too much time and too much into one of them.
One of the interesting points that you bring up is that not only do we have these multiple platforms, but in 100% of the cases, you do not own that platform, right? No one here owns a TV station. No one here owns Facebook, right? And you go south of the terms and conditions on any of these platforms, and they will take you off in a second, right? And
Yep.
usually there's no recourse, or the recourse takes this whole process of weeks, if not months, to do. So you really have to be cognizant of, if I'm going to be putting out content on this channel, I have to know their rules, I have by their terms and conditions, and also have a backup, because if you become too dependent on Facebook, for example, that's a problem if Facebook all of a sudden decides to shut you down. So
Yeah, and things
thank you so much.
turn in a dime. It's fickle, right? It's a fickle world. So all of a sudden something falls out of favor, and then you've lost that channel.
I want to switch gears for a second and talk about how to do this, right? So one of the things, I think our kids have mastered this, right? Where they just get up and, take their selfies and do their streaks and do their things like that. I'm probably already dating myself just by saying that, right? But one of the things that I found was, especially when I started going live with this podcast, right, is you really gotta be quick on your feet, and you gotta you have to know what it is that you want to say. You have to be able to present, and I would say most of us already have parts of that ability, if not have mastered that ability. Just to just to wing your way through it, right? One of the interesting things about your one big tip is following the rules of improv, right? So I have never gotten up on stage and done improv. I've enjoyed it, right? But I could see, I could see how that would work. But what's interesting is that basically what we're talking about here is that you're going to improvise your way through making your content. That almost doesn't seem right, and I'd like to get your take on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, my one big tip around being yes is really just a general yes to life. Like, I have a tendency to say yes to almost anything, because, you want to try it once. And it's also, as an entrepreneur, if a client wants you to do something, you're like, yes, and then you'll figure it out. And so following the improv is about continuing the conversation, keeping it open, because the second you say no, or the second you say but, you've shut something down. Improv teaches you to say yes, and it allows you to extend the conversation. It keeps it open. It doesn't mean that you've negated any other opinion, like you're sort of just building upon it. You've really become part of that conversation. So it's a really great way of thinking of not only creating content, but also just like leading your life. So I think I've built an entire career around just saying yes. Like, somebody's like, hey, could your company do this? Yeah, we could do that. And then we go figure out how to do it on the back end. So,
all right. So let's be clear. We're not talking about this in the context of selling vaporware, right? Vaporware is software that hasn't been created yet. We're not talking about this, just winging it and, just throwing proverbial poop against the wall and seeing what sticks, right? So when you're talking improv to a B2B client, what goes through their head, and how does that conversation manifest itself, and how do you turn it around then to your favor?
Well, I mean, so our mission statement as a company is saving the world from boring, broken marketing. And typically marketing specifically for B2B companies falls in one of those two categories. It's super boring because I think that they've got to show, big vision pictures of, oh, you could go accomplish this, whatever. No one really pays attention to that, right? So like, how do you do something? Because improv is about sort of making you think differently. Like, what is that? And what would that context be? So as a B2B company, how can you think about it in a different way so you're going to stand out? Like, I want a visceral reaction. I either want to hate it or love it. And then if you get into the and side of it, what you're doing is including, like, it's not that you're saying that you have to necessarily make choice as much as you can include something within an existing realm. So B2B companies often feel like they're in these boxes and they're definitively different from one of their competitors or whatever, and that's just not true. And so as they can think about being a little bit more open in that, they can bring more people into the conversation to then educate them about why they're the right choice.
So what's interesting about doing something like that, especially if you're going to put a figurehead or someone who's going to maybe inflect some own personal biases into that conversation, how how would you help them manage through that? Because all it takes now is for one person to do one tweet that offends more than two people, and we got cancel culture going on, and everyone just seems to be like, they either go from one extreme to, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to offend anybody, where they do want to put some information out and they do want to be edgy and they do want to be heard, and part of that is drumming up that speed. How do you help companies figure that part out?
Well, you've got to think about the thought leaders you're putting in place. So your company has a personality. Every company has some type of personality. And so the type of thought leader you're using should map to that personality. So if we use like Gary Vee, he's a very, he'll say whatever, he's okay with cussing, all those kind of things. But you compare him to like a Marcus Lemonis, who's very much sort of, very careful, very caring of people. Like, those personalities are very different. And so the thought leaders for their companies need to be different. So when you're thinking about your company, you're going to put forth a thought leader that is in line with what your brand represents, what it does, how it fits, and giving them some guardrails as to how they live within it. But the best thought leaders are going to be very close to the brand that they are representing.
That's really interesting. So as you're going through this process and you're helping set up those, like you said, those guardrails, and trying to figure out who that persona is going to be, what's the process for figuring that out? I mean, do you have like a shorthand for, things to look out for, things not to look out for? How does that look?
Yeah, I mean, well, so number one, you can't fake it. So like, if you're going to build your brand's persona, you already have one. You just have to identify what it is. Now you can be aspirational, and that aspirational will take some time, but you have to really understand who you are today. And so we have a proven discovery process that we take clients through that gets us to define the words for the brand. Like, what do those words mean? What does their persona look like? How do they kind of present themselves into the world, and how do they talk about themselves? And it has to be form, because if it isn't, then it feels inauthentic. And then, they're just doing it for the marketing. They're just doing it for for people to pay attention to them. And those things don't last. So if it is authentic, then it's going to be absorbed by your internal employees and carried forward. It's all those intangibles about a brand that, you can't describe, but So like, my great example is, there's a business partner I worked with before. He and I were both the same age, same income, owned the same company. He was a Dunkin' Donuts guy and I'm a Starbucks guy. And they both sell coffee. Like, they both sell coffee. That's what they do. But he didn't really go to Starbucks and I don't go to Dunkin' Donuts, because we relate ourselves more closely to what those brands do, how they kind of stand in the world. And that's how people feel comfortable with choosing to work with a company.
That's really interesting. So let me follow up with this then. Can you walk us through sort of like a case study? Don't need to drop names, but how you brought a company that maybe was a little bit lost in this perspective, and through the coaching and the training that you guys have provided, have been able to, achieve a much greater outcome for their business?
Yeah, so we do a lot of M&A. So companies that are buying other companies. And so one of our clients is a company called GenCap. It's JENCAP. We help them merge 17 businesses up underneath their umbrella brand. And the way we did that, we had to bring all the previous presidents of the companies together. We have a card sorting exercise, and we made them all break up into groups and card sort what GenCap would be about and what it would look like. it was interesting to see where there were differences and get them to talk about it. So it is kind of like group therapy. So, like if we were to describe this brand and the brand walked in the room, what would be the words we would use? Why would we use them? There's some other activities we do, one called Cocktail Party, which is really fun about the brand going to a cocktail party and how it would act and what it would look like. So some of those things get us to get agreement within the room. And instead of just using a word that no one knows the definition for, you've fully described it. So when I say this word, now you and I both know that we mean the same thing. And that allows us to bring them to some level of clarity, and then also create that persona around it in a very strong way.
That is that's an excellent and succinct way to describe it, right? Because, just thinking about it in a group therapy type of environment, basically what you're doing is that you're having, first of all, you're making sure that everyone's speaking the same language. I know for a fact that sometimes when I'm making a presentation, I can, throw off a few terms and it could mean something totally different to them. And, we do have to make sure that we're speaking that same language. So I really appreciate you articulating that part.
My one real quick favorite example on that is if I said, let's go skiing, you may have just thought of snow skiing and I thought of water skiing. So you have to know what we mean by that. Because if we both show up at the car, we may have completely different things. I'm going to bring a swimsuit and suntan lotion, and you may bring, skis and a jacket. So
I love it. Love it. Eric, where can people learn more about your company, and how can they reach out to you directly if they want to learn more?
So ligerpartners.com is the company URL. So that's here on the screen. So go to ligerpartners.com. I'm, of course, on LinkedIn, Eric V. Holtzclaw. Love to link in with you there and talk, those types of things. Also on Twitter, not as much as I used to be, but you can find me there. I do have a very large following on Twitter, but favorite platform to connect on right now is probably LinkedIn.
Amazing. Eric, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun. I love talking about this stuff, and I really appreciate you breaking down these concepts for us today.
Thanks for your